Hello and welcome to Arirang News. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. As of 11:22 a.m. on a Friday, the Constitutional Court of Korea officially ousted now former President Yoon Suk Yeol over his martial law declaration, which the court judged as unconstitutional. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off.
The current time is 11:22 a.m. Ruling. President Yoon Suk Yeol is hereby removed from office.
4 months after President Yoon Suk Yeol's December 3rd martial law, the Constitutional Court on Friday issued a unanimous decision to oust the nation's leader, immediately stripping him of his presidency. All 8 members of the bench decided to uphold the National Assembly's motion to remove Yoon from power, declaring his martial law declaration a grave violation of the Constitution and democratic principles, and a betrayal of public trust. Beginning at 11 a.m., Acting Chief Justice Moon Young-bae delivered the collective decision and reasoning, which showed the full bench upheld all 5 grounds for impeachment presented by the National Assembly on how Yoon's martial law disrupted the country's constitutional order. Yoon had made the unprecedented effort of defending himself in his impeachment trial alongside his lawyers. He argued that martial law had been his executive right under the Constitution, which allows the measure to be triggered in times of national emergency, with the need to maintain public order. Yoon has cited the opposition-led National Assembly's legislative abuse, budget cuts, and excessive impeachment motions against his administration as amounting to a state of national emergency. He also raised concerns of election fraud and concluded that he'd declared martial law as a warning or appeal to the nation. The court rejected Yoon's arguments as unacceptable and insufficient.
By declaring martial law in violation of the Constitution and relevant laws, the respondent reenacted the historical abuse of emergency powers, throwing citizens into a state of shock and causing disruption across all areas of society, economy, politics, and diplomacy.
The court found there to be no genuine emergency nor severe disruption of public order to justify Yoon's imposition of the controversial measure. While acknowledging intense political tensions and the opposition's impeachment motions, the court stressed that Yoon had the democratic tools to resolve political disputes without unconstitutional actions. Also, Yoon's martial law did not meet procedural requirements, as he did not sufficiently consult the cabinet, nor did he notify Parliament about his martial law proclamation. Second, the bench said Yoon deployed military and police forces illegally to obstruct the National Assembly, infringing on lawmakers' constitutional rights and undermining democratic governance. Third, Yoon's martial law proclamation banned political activities, violating citizens' basic rights. Also, the former president ordered unwarranted searches of the National Election Commission, breaching its independence. Lastly, Yoon infringed on judicial independence by attempting to locate former senior judges for potential arrest. The ruling comes 111 days after the court case began with the National Assembly's impeachment vote. 11 trial hearings and 60 witness testimonies were held. The deliberation took a record 38 days, 3 times longer than previous presidential impeachment cases. Yoon is now South Korea's second elected leader to be ousted by impeachment after former President Park Geun-hye was removed from office in 2017.
A historic day of reckoning for South Korean democracy, the ruling emphasizes presidential accountability and the urgent need for bipartisan compromise in a deeply divided political climate. As this chapter closes, South Korea moves forward, testing and reinforcing the strengths of its democratic foundations. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The political fate of the prosecutor general turned president has ended in disgrace, with the remainder of his term cut short. The former president sent out a brief message after the ruling. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
Shortly after the Constitutional Court upheld the impeachment of President Yoon Suk Yeol, Yoon laid out a brief message through his legal representatives. While he didn't directly mention the Constitutional Court's ruling, he thanked his supporters and said, quote, "I am sincerely grateful for your unwavering support and encouragement, even when I fell short. I deeply regret not being able to live up to your hopes and expectations." Meanwhile, media caught the moment the phoenix flag, the symbol of South Korea's president, came down from the Yongsan presidential office building, signaling the end of President Yoon's 1,060-day presidency.
The office will be supporting acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, but at 3:30 p.m., the presidential office released a statement saying that the Chief of Staff for Policy, the National Security Advisor, along with all senior-level secretaries have expressed their intent to resign.
The acting president, however, rejected the resignations a few hours later, saying that the government needs to be in full operation. As for Yoon, however, he has now become a civilian. While he is still at the presidential residence and will have to leave, there are no clear rules for that, so we will have to wait. Former President Park Geun-hye left the former presidential Blue House 2 days after her ruling. Yoon is expected to return to his home in the Seocho-gu district of Seoul. From this point on, he will not be treated as a former president due to Friday's ruling. This means no presidential pension or a spot at the National Cemetery. The Presidential Security Service will no longer be fully protecting him, but because he has state confidential information, there will be a downsized security team to at least guarantee his safety for at least 5 years and 10 at the maximum. This also ties into his criminal trial. It'll now be much easier for the prosecutors to call Yoon in for further questioning, as he won't have an official security system around him. That wasn't the case until now, as we had seen some conflict between the investigators for the criminal case and the Presidential Security Service. In South Korea's legal system, if Yoon is convicted of leading an insurrection, he could face life in prison or the death penalty. 김도현, Arirang News.
So South Korea is now in an early presidential election mode, meaning a new president must be elected within 60 days. For more, our political correspondent Shin Ha-young is standing by live at the National Assembly with the details. Ha-young, when can we expect the election date to be announced?
Well, Tommy, as rival parties gears up for a 2-month race, the date for the 21st presidential election is widely expected to be set at Tuesday's cabinet meeting. And acting President Han Duck-soo has until April 14 to officially announce the date. And meanwhile, yesterday, acting President Han also held a phone call with the National Election Commission Chief No Tae-ak to discuss preparations for the upcoming election. The two reportedly agreed on June 3rd as the likely election date. They also emphasized the need for close coordination and fair election management given the compressed timeline. And Han also expressed that ensuring a fair and transparent election is key to restoring public trust amid ongoing political turmoil. And Do said the commission will work closely with the government to ensure the election is both fair and held on schedule.
So June 3rd, as most widely seen as a most likely date for the presidential date. Now, Ha-young, I heard preliminary candidate registrations already started yesterday on Friday, right?
You're right, Tammy. Right after the acting president Han Duck-soo officially notified the National Election Commission of the presidential vacancy, the commission began accepting preliminary candidate registration for the 21st presidential election on Friday, which was yesterday. And those wishing to register as preliminary candidates must submit documents proving their eligibility to run for office. And they are also required to pay a deposit of 60 million Korean won, about $41,000, which is 20% of the final candidate deposit. And once registered, candidates are allowed to open a campaign office and distribute promotional materials. The NEC also announced on Friday that overseas absentees planning to vote abroad in the upcoming election can begin registering as of yesterday. And overseas absentees include students studying abroad, workers stationed overseas, and travelers who remain on South Korea's resident registration list. And they can register by visiting a diplomatic mission or through mail, email, or even NEC website. That's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Dami.
All right, Ha-young, thank you for the coverage. And despite Friday's final verdict, protests both in support and against impeachment are continuing today. Those for the impeachment are celebrating and wrapping up their protests on Saturday, while those against impeachment are now entering a new phase of protesting against the court's ruling. An organization that's for the impeachment said that they will be gathering at around 4 p.m. near Gyeongbokgung Palace, with 100,000 people expected. And an anti-impeachment organization said they will be gathering starting at 1 p.m. at Gwanghwamun Square, with around 200,000 people expected. Acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo urged all foreign and security ministries to unite and safeguard national security and public safety. Convening the National Security Council just hours after President Yoon's removal from the office, Han warned that North Korea may try to exploit the political situation through provocations and propaganda. He stressed the need to maintain a watertight state of readiness. Han also called for continued cooperation with the Trump administration, especially in diplomacy and security. Now, on trade issues, including Washington's reciprocal tariffs, he urged a coordinated whole-of-government response with support from the private sector. And a day after Friday's ruling, North Korea reported on the ouster of former President Yoon, noting that the dismissal was the result of a unanimous vote over his brief martial law order. The North state media made no commentary on Saturday, instead citing headlines from major foreign news outlets. By contrast, back in 2017, it took just about 2 hours for the North to report on former President Park Geun-hye's dismissal. Experts say the regime appears to be keeping its distance from the South, as leader Kim Jong-un has described inter-Korean relations as hostile. And the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to working with South Korea's acting president Han Duck-soo, stressing its ironclad security commitment to Seoul. A State Department spokesperson said in response to a question from Yonhap News Agency on Friday that the U.S. respects South Korea's democratic institutions, its legal processes, and the Constitutional Court's decision. The European Union also expressed its respect for the constitution and legal proceedings in South Korea, reiterating its close strategic partnership with Seoul. Trade tensions between the U.S. and China have reached a new peak, with both nations taking drastic steps that threaten to reshape global commerce. On Friday, China announced that it will impose a 34% tariff on all U.S. imports starting next week. And stock markets tumbled following the announcement. Our Kim Jong-sil has the details.
In a dramatic escalation of the ongoing trade dispute, China has retaliated against the U.S. with a hefty 34% tariff on all U.S. imports.
The Customs Tariff Commission of the State Council announced on Friday that China will impose an additional 34% tariffs on all products imported from the United States starting from April 10th.
The move comes just days after U.S. President Donald Trump unveiled 54% tariffs on all Chinese imports. The new tariffs have sent shockwaves through global markets. In the U.S., all three major stock indexes plummeted, with the Dow Jones falling by 5.5% and the S&P 500 dropping nearly 6%, capping the worst week since 2020. Despite increased demand for safe haven assets, gold prices also fell nearly 3%. Analysts suggest that the recent market crashes have left investors with liquidity shortages, prompting them to liquidate gold holdings to cover margin calls.
It's an economic Armageddon that was unleashed by Trump. And the tariff war has begun, and we believe, this could set tech stocks and the tech industry in the U.S. back, potentially a decade.
Analysts warn that the economic consequences of the trade war could be severe, particularly for U.S. tech companies reliant on Asian supply chains. Professor Yang Jun-seok, an economics expert at the Catholic University of Korea, says China is directly challenging President Trump, arguing that once tariffs exceed a certain level, China faces little risk, but it has rattled American investors.
It'll be a big question whether European Union and Canada will join China in retaliation. If they do, then President Trump may have no choice but to back down from his high tariff policy.
As stock markets continue to tumble, all eyes are on whether China's latest move will prompt President Trump to reconsider his aggressive tariff policies. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this afternoon. We'll be back later at 6 p.m. Korea time with more stories on the aftermath of former President Yoon's dismissal. Thanks for watching.